I'd like to call to order the Ordinance Committee meeting of February 23rd. Ms. Peterson, would you please call a roll?
Chair, Andy White.
Here.
Grant House.
Here.
Here.
Thank you. So would you like to introduce us to the items on our agenda? Would you like to introduce us to the item on our agenda?
Subject today is procedures for the appointment and service of the youth members of the Parks and Recreation Commission. And Sarah Hanna will be making the presentation.
Thank you. Ms. Hanna?
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. I wanted to start with a little bit of background about how we got to this point briefly. But the purpose of us coming to Ordinance Committee today is to approve and recommend to City Council an amendment of Section 2.08.020 of the Municipal Code, which establishes the procedures and appointment and service of a youth member on the Park and Recreation Commission. Youth have been advocates for our department for a very long time, providing information to us on programming that they desire, leadership programs, community service, and also a number of projects that we've seen come forward through the past couple of years, particularly the skateboard park and the teen center. Without the advocacy of youth and teens in our community, these two particular projects may never have come forward to council. For a number of years also, we've had an intern on the Park and Recreation Commission, and the internship process started in 1995. Applicants could come forward and then were interviewed by the mayor and appointed by the mayor to serve on our commission and provide information on youth and a perspective of youth to the commission. And this has always served us well, but it's been a concern over the years that they were a non-voting member and that perhaps we needed to strengthen the youth voice on our commission in a number of ways. We looked at alternatives, including a mock vote, and in ways for them to become an official member of the commission. But because we knew it took a charter amendment, that was put off because of the costly nature of adding a charter. When other commissions were making changes to their membership and the charter was going to be go up to public vote, Measure C was added in November of last year to make a change to both the Park and Recreation Commission, merging the parks and the recreation commissions together and increasing the size to 7 members. And at that time, it was also, the measure also authorized, with the approval of the people, that City Council could appoint a youth member 16 years of age or older who resides within the city to serve on the Park and Recreation Commission. At the time, the measure did not define the manner of appointing the youth or the term of office for the youth member, because it was decided that that would be something that the council would decide after the measure passed. So we are here today because we do want to establish that procedure. We met as a subcommittee of 2 Park and Recreation Commissioners and 2 youth members from Youth Council to determine the terms and to look at the procedures that are in place right now. And it was pretty much decided from the get-go that they wanted the youth member to be a fully fledged commissioner and that they would follow the current guidelines of the city advisory committees. So at the committee meeting, we reviewed the guidelines of the advisory committees and also looked at a draft ordinance provided by the city attorney. At the meeting, there was a number of concerns that I've put in the report here that came to light. One of them was that it's a 4-year term to be a commissioner. And since the appointment could take place for a youth that was 16 years or older, it was felt that maybe some youth would be going to college in 2 years, or their lives would change and they may not be able to fulfill the 4-year term. But the committee talked about it, and because Nancy Rapp, the Parks and Recreation Director, meets with all commission appointees to talk about the responsibility of the commission and their interests on the commission. It was felt that during those meetings, we could explore, Nancy could explore with the applicants their desire to stay for 2 years or 4 years, and that they shouldn't be dissuaded from wanting to serve, because there is a process for replacement if someone were to create a vacancy by leaving. So we felt that we do, even if, not all youth are going to be leaving town, so there's many good colleges locally. So we felt that that was, though it is a 4-year term, that we still could find good youth applicants even though we didn't change the length of the term. One of the other things that came to light was, well, what if there were several youth applicants? How would the council decide? And we know it is the council's responsibility, though it may be difficult for them to determine who the best applicant was and is, and to appoint them. But the subcommittee also recommended that maybe we modify the questions, the interview questions, so that there are some youth related questions to improve the advocacy of youth and the knowledge for the council on their applicants and how they relate to youth issues and their knowledge of youth issues locally. So we were proposing to put together some new interview questions, and when we move to council for final approval of the ordinance, we will include those in the report. Also, there was questions about, well, it was always taught in the ordinance originally was talked of the youth member. Was this a particular designation? Did they have to be, were they a dedicated youth member representative, or were they just an advocate for youth? And so we talked about this quite a bit. We didn't want it to be interpreted that it was a designated youth member, but rather that it was an opportunity for additional discussion with youth to bring the youth perspective to the commission and to provide a voting opportunity for youth, both through leadership and as an advocate for the commission. So that the committee, the subcommittee decided very specifically not to include a specific youth member, like some other committees have specific representation on their committees. It was decided to allow them to be a full-fledged commissioner and not have specific representation. One of the other questions that came up was, what happens when they turn 18? Do they have to be a qualified elector if they turn 18? And we felt that we should keep with the guidelines of the other advisory committee members, that they would not be disqualified from their term because they became 18. In fact, it was found to be beneficial if they started at 16 and maybe they continued up to the age of 20, that they would have learned things along the way, that they would be a better advocate as they stayed through those 4 years. And we also, it was important to know that to be a qualified elector, you did not necessarily have to register to vote or be a registered voter, only to be qualified in the terms that you could, if you wanted to, vote. So we decided that in that same way, we didn't want them to be disqualified and only to follow the same reasons for disqualification that other advisory committee members would have. So those were probably the 4 main areas that we talked with the subcommittee about. We followed up by going to Youth Council and explaining the ordinance, allowing them to take a look at the ordinance and listen to their concerns, and reviewed some of the committee comments. They approved the ordinance and moved it forward to the Park and Recreation Commission. We took it to the commission in January. The Park and Recreation Commission, B.B. Longstreet, the chair, had asked to be here today, but she had a conflicting appointment. But they fully supported the direction that the subcommittee had decided to go to have it be follow the guidelines of the regular advisory committee meeting, or excuse me, advisory committee guidelines and rules and regulations. So the draft ordinance is attached. As you can see, the section 2, A and B, those two parts talk about the appointment and service of the youth member, and we took out many of the references to youth member and instead replaced it with person under the age of 18. And I think the city attorney did a pretty good job of modifying the ordinance to address the concerns of the subcommittee and provide a ordinance that was clear about what would happen if they become older than 18, if there is a vacancy or they're disqualified, what would take place. So we kind of like the ordinance the way it is, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have or changes that you may want to address.
And
Thank you, Ms. Hanlon.
If I could just add one other piece of background, because I just realized that we have new council members and this wasn't addressed in this particular report. But the designation or allowing a youth to serve on the commission formally with a vote actually came as a recommendation from the Council Committee on Youth and Children that designated a subcommittee that included members of that committee and youth council members and staff to look at all of the different rules and regulations that guide city boards and commissions to look and see how is it feasible to give youth a real voice if they're going to get that leadership experience of being on a city board or commission.
Thank you, Ms. Rapp. Any questions of staff? Mr. House?
Ms. Hanna, will there be a youth intern still with the Parks and Recreation Commission?
I don't think that we really talked about that.
I think the assumption is that we would. That's a relationship that has been very strong over the years between the Youth Council and the Park and Recreation Commission. And we view that as an opportunity to really mentor a youth in that additional leadership experience. So I think in the different times that this has come before the commission and in the subcommittee meetings, there has been that assumption, but that is a non-voting position.
Right. Okay, good. There's nothing that we're doing today that would affect that. I just was curious about it. And then I understand that, and it's repeated a few times, that the City Council may, but is not required to, appoint a youth applicant to the vacant position on the commission. So if the council were still satisfied, say, with the service of someone who started at 16 or 17 and they were continuing on, there would not be an obligation to then appoint another younger person to the commission.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, very good. I'll just comment. I think this is on the right track and definitely consistent with what we were expecting when this went to the voters. So I'm pleased. So maybe others have comments as well, but I support this.
Thank you, Mr. House.
I do.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Yeah. Thank you. Make sure I get this right. If somebody starts at 16, turns 18, they're sort of a full-fledged or fuller-fledged member, then there could be another 16-year-old appointed?
That's correct.
Okay. So, and this is a 7-person commission, so we'd have 2 people of minority status, majority age on the commission.
Potentially, yes. If the original member turned 18, then they would retain their commission seat.
Right.
And the opportunity would open itself up for a youth member.
All right. Well, I think it's really important to have a youth perspective. It worries me a little bit, though, and Grant, I want to hear what you and Benny have to think about this, that somebody has a full voting capacity, but we've already decided that I'm wondering, though, if we should put, because I don't know about you, but when I was 16, what I thought when I was 16 was not the same thing as I thought when I was 18. I was a different guy. I wonder if it would make sense to have a shorter term, and if we're allowed to do that, to have a 2-year term for the who's ever appointed at 16. Are we within our bounds to do that, and would you be open to that, or you think that's a bad idea? Gentlemen.
Mr. House,
Well, I'll comment then. We had talked a little bit about some of the issues around having a young person when this first was crafted for the ballot, and one of them was they're not an adult yet, and they can't vote and things like that. And our attorney was pretty clear in giving us direction or giving us guidance that. Remember, Parks and Recreation Commission is advisory to the City Council, and all of the decisions can be appealed to the City Council. So we, at City Council level, hold the ultimate responsibility, and that it was, so from a legal perspective, it was quite all right. I tend to think that what was intended, and I think I'm pretty clear about this, was that you would actually have the person that fills that role would be an equal member, I guess is the way I want to say it, to all the others that are on the commission, and not to be diminished in any way. I think practically speaking, you're going to have young people who go to college and vacate a position. You know, they may start with a 4-year position, and they may then get accepted somewhere out of the area, and then they'll resign, and then that will open up the position again. And I think I'd like to hear from staff on what that process would look like. But I don't have a real concern about somebody starting at 16 and carrying into their, for 4 years. They may want to reapply and continue on, right? And could be for a couple terms. So I think the intent was to be really truly an equal participant with the other commissioners. And certainly we can relook at this in a few years and see if it's working. But
my take is that to keep things simple, and that it will, after all, be council and others who will be having input on who's appointed. So I think we've got a flexible tool here, which can where a youth can stay on after achieving one step of majority, and then there will be opportunity if that person, another vacancy opens up for, is that person, is more youth represented needed, or are we looking for another component of our recreation stakeholder base to participate? So I'm comfortable that we have a flexible tool here, and that I don't think it needs to be improved further than it is now.
Allow me to add, Mr. Chair, one of the things that I've noticed, and it was really, I guess maybe an eye-opener, I should have known coming in, but the quality of our youth interns that we've had that have stepped up to a leadership role, that have been doing this, except they haven't had a chance to vote. They've even sometimes you have them sit up here, don't you? Yeah. It's just, it's amazing, their perspective and their how articulate they are and how competent they are. I certainly wasn't, but something must have happened between my childhood and now to have these kids be just really there and present and participating members. So it gave me some reassurance, I think, from seeing that.
Any other questions of staff? And then, you have any comments further, Mr. Hotchkiss? Yes.
Well, I'll go along with my colleagues. I would like to say I think a 2-year thing would be better, but that's pushing water uphill, so we won't do that. I can't think of anything else. Oh, and you brought up the point that a youth member may be appointed, but if the city council chose not to, then there would be no youth member. Is that correct? If I have a
Correct.
Okay, fine. I just want to be sure. Thank you.
Okay, and my comment is I support the proposal as it's outlined by staff at this point.
Then Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and move that we approve and recommend to the City Council this amendment as we have here before us today.
The motion to recommend approval of the ordinance amendment as outlined by staff. Is there a second? I'll second it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm going to oppose.
Okay, we're going to stay consistent with our tradition of having a full range of discussion up here. I have a couple of procedural questions about this meeting. Number one, I saw, we actually got an email saying that there were minutes. I quickly printed them out to bring it in here, and I see I have actually an agenda from our last meeting. Are there minutes for each of these meetings, and do we approve them as part of this process customarily? Okay, no. Okay, and then also, is there public comment that is supposed to occur at this meeting?
This is a fully noticed Brown Act meeting, and there would be public comment had there been public here to comment.
Okay, well, so I'll just note that there's no public present, and so there would be no need to ask for public comment. Okay, well, is there any other items that staff would like to present at this point? Anything else that the subcommittee would like to was there a, Ms. Rapp?
Chair White and Councilmember House, you did ask a couple of questions that, I know you've made your decision, but you asked a couple of questions of staff, but we didn't go back and answer them, and I wondered if you wanted staff to provide that information to you. We can just cover it when we go to council. It's up to you. I was just going to provide additional information on the 2-year term, and you also asked about if someone steps down and there's a vacancy, what's the reappointment
thank you.
process.
It's true. I left that hanging. Let's go ahead and just hear it. It'd be good for us to hear that when we go back.
Well, I did want you to know that the whole issue of the 2-year and the 4-year term was probably the biggest discussion that the committee had, and ultimately did get to the point that you made in supporting the 4-year term, that the feeling was, we on all boards and commissions, you get really great commissioners, and then maybe you get some commissioners who either aren't quite, as engaged, and usually those situations just kind of take care of themselves over time. So if in fact there was not a good fit with the commission, with any commissioner, adult or youth, that generally is addressed by the chair and whoever the staff liaison is over time in trying to address some of those issues. I've had to do that myself. But the feeling really was, from our past experience with youth serving on the commission and the caliber of individual and their engagement, that we really didn't anticipate having any challenges in that area. And so the discussion was more about, would the 4-year term be a deterrent to some of those applicants that might potentially be interested. But it was a significant discussion back and forth by the subcommittee, so I wanted you to know that. And also, as with any vacancy on the commission, I just received a notice from one of our commissioners that is going to step down. And so that's handled in the same way. It goes to the city clerk's office, and then we know that we'll have an additional vacancy the next time that recruitments come up. And we do a pretty good amount of work in terms of trying to recruit people to serve on our boards and commissions. So and it just would follow the standard existing city policies for recruitment and the application process and appointment process.
And the folks who are appointed, no matter what their age, are serving at the pleasure of the council. I mean, we have people who resign or for some reason become disqualified, conflicts of interest. There's lots of different reasons why. And I know I can't remember when that's happened. It's possible to just ask them to step down, but we haven't had to do that, I don't think, for a great long time. So anyway, I'm glad with the decision we're making here to move it forward, but I'm glad you answered those questions. Thanks.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Hotchkiss? Okay. Well, thank you, staff, for your presentation, and this will move forward. Then, what's the expectation for this going to council?
2 weeks at the soonest.
Okay. In 2 weeks at the soonest, this will come back to council. Any other business for this to come before this committee? Great. Well, thank you, and we're adjourned.